going on, everybody? It's your boy Big Dave here with another episode of Culture Dad's Age of Sword and Cassette. Today, we are going to talk about something that is near and dear to Mr. Mike's heart. And this is something that I found that I think is pretty interesting, right? Because, I grew up American, and, America is right next to Canada. I've been to Canada before, but Canada kind of gets a little bit overlooked as far as their culture and their history and their art and all this kind of stuff. Like, for example, I don't really know a whole lot about Canada besides when I went there. I liked the food. The poutines were good. I know that they make French fries with gravy on them. I know that Rush is from there. I saw, I know Tom Green is from there, right? So I don't know a whole lot about Canada. So, Mike, tell us about what we're going to talk about today, about Canadian identity and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Okay. Well, I guess I'll sort of start it off with sort of like an anecdote from after I left Canada, because I don't live there anymore. I'm an expat nationalist. You can imagine what kind of cognitive dissonance I go through with that. But so anyway, I left Canada almost 10 years ago now. It's only a couple months shy of 10 years now to live in Australia. And when I got here in Australia, I was asked, obviously stuck out like a sore thumb in terms of my accent and everything like that. Like, everybody thinks I'm an American, and it doesn't bother me. But Aussies are very apologetic when they find out I'm not American. But the question always comes up. So, like, what is it like in Canada? Tell me something about Canada. And one of the guys that I was working with asked me, so what's some Canadian slang? Tell me a little bit about that. And I was like, I was just dumbfounded by this question. I couldn't answer him. I was like, other than the basic trope of like Canadian A or whatever, I was just like, I couldn't answer him, right? Because it's like asking the fish, tell me a little bit about water, like these are like the Canadian slang, the culture are like, all these things are like the background assumptions and like modes of thought that inform everything that I think and say and do and believe, right? So it's actually, in a way, it was kind of hard for me to do any prep for this episode at all, because it's like, it's just hard. I don't know. It's hard to explain. I hope that makes sense. But I figured what we could talk a little bit about is we could maybe start it off with a hopefully brief, like sketch of Canadian history, because I mean, most people who are non-American at least understand something about American history. They know the highlights. They know the Revolutionary War. They know the Civil War and a number of other things, sort of like through American history. But Canadian history is really sort of, even for us Canadians, it's a bit of a blank. I learned about it in school, and I was taught Canadian history in probably the driest and most uninspiring way imaginable, which is really a shame, because actually Canadians have a very interesting history. Do you learn anything at all in America about Canadian history, or like even just the interaction of like Americans with Canada in American history? Do you learn anything about that, Dave?
Almost nothing. I remember we had there was like a brief overview of the French-Canadian War. And then like after that, like it's just right. Like we just get this kind of vibe that Canada is sort of America, but not really, and it's up there, and that's about it. So we don't really get taught anything about Canada. It's just the French-Canadian War is just about it. I'm sure if people that go to better schools or that I did might get a little bit more than I did, but I don't know. That's all I remember from school is this very brief overview of the French-Canadian War. And I actually had to, when I got home from school, I was thinking, I'm going to look at, so I went and I looked into it a little bit more. And I thought it was an interesting thing, but other than that, nothing at all.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, Americans and Canadians, I'll be the first to admit that we have similar culture, especially since World War II, basically. But before we get into the culture, let's go through a little bit of the history here. So obviously Canada populated by indigenous tribes from, who knows when back in the day, tens of thousands or, 9,000 years ago plus, crossing from the land bridge from Asia. And basically the beginning of European history in Canada begins with the Viking settlements in, I forget the name actually. It's in Newfoundland in about 1000 AD. But excuse me, Vinland. Yeah, that's what it would have been called. I forget what the city name is called now, but that's what it would have been called to the Vikings. But for some reason, it just didn't take, right? Like they didn't survive or they left or something. It's not clear what happened. That basically was kind of a dead end. But really, European history in Canada begins with John Cabot, who actually is named Giovanni Caboto, nice Italian name there, claiming North America for the British Crown right around the year 1500. The British kind of didn't really do a whole lot with it, though, at that point. Set up a few like fishing outposts, but Jacques Cartier claimed it for France about 30 or 40 years later. And this is really when Canadian history kind of begins in earnest. He named the settlement, the main settlement there, Canada, after one of the indigenous languages, Kanata, which I was always taught in school means collection of huts. It basically means like settlement, essentially. So the early settlement, you get like the French cities of Quebec and Port Royal in Nova Scotia. English settlements kind of follow not too much longer after that in what's now Newfoundland and south of Hudson's Bay. This is what was at the time called Rupert's Land. And at this point in time, in the 16th century, the fur trade became extremely lucrative and attracted French and English fur trappers, lots of people like explorers and adventurers. And this was basically the reason to go to Canada for European explorers for a long time, was basically to be part of the fur trade. And this, at some stage in the 16th century, actually it was exactly 1629, they kicked off what's kind of it's a bit of a the name sort of sells it short for how savage this thing was, but there's called the Beaver Wars. Starts out in 1629. The French basically took most of that English-controlled Rupert's Land that I mentioned, but the native Iroquois sort of like interfered with the French fur trade, and then the French allied against the Iroquois and basically made war on them. And then the French allied with like a bunch of other tribes, the Algonquins, the Hurons, against this Iroquois confederacy. And then the Dutch arrive and traded with the Iroquois, gave them guns, and these intertribal conflicts at that point escalate into war. And eventually the Iroquois start attacking the French. The beaver population is like decimated, and this makes the war worse. And it's crazy because it's like, the Beaver Wars, again, sounds pretty low key, but it actually was extremely genocidal between a lot of these tribes, Native Canadian tribes, which kind of puts the lie to the whole retarded, like noble savage thing that people sort of believe or whatever. Eventually, the English took over a bunch of Dutch colonies at this stage, so that the Dutch, who were like giving these natives guns, the Iroquois actually ended up allying with the British. And this was kind of like the decisive turning point in the French losing North America, because of course, up until that point, they basically controlled, a huge amount of like North America, from like Newfoundland to Louisiana, right? But this was sort of like the height of French dominion in North America, but this was kind of the turning point, was when they effectively lost this war and had to give the English settlement back to the English. And so that, basically this war was kind of fought to a stalemate, but it was kind of France really almost didn't recover after that. And later on, what you get is what's called the 7 Years' War, which is actually a kind of a world war. It was fought on multiple fronts. It was fought in Europe, but it was also fought in Canada and in North America as well. Americans call this the French and Indian War. I think this is the war that you were thinking of, Dave. It's much wider than just the Canadian conflict. It actually, like, the 7 Years' War is kind of understudied. It needs to be better understood because it really shaped the course of world history. Mm-hmm. This is where the British Empire comes into its own. And really what this war is two conflicts on the continent, on the European continent. It's Britain versus France, but it's also Prussia versus Austria and a bunch of allies, including France. But eventually it basically became Britain and Prussia versus France and Austria. And on the Canadian front, Britain basically took over most of New France. And on the European front, Prussia basically emerged as a great power. And Prussia's standing on the European continent, like, it basically allowed Britain to kind of focus its naval and overseas supremacy. So it kind of didn't have to worry about what's going on the continent. And it's actually the English historian William Pitt said America was won in Germany. And this is what it means, basically, from France. This is a huge win for Britain and a huge loss for France. And then, of course, after that, we get the American Revolution. I don't think I need to explain anything about that. But the upshot, obviously, being that the American colonies were decoupled from the British crown. But the Americans were kind of like surrounded on all sides by hostile British loyalists. And this is very important, like, with respect to Canadian identity, because, to give you the punchline up front, the difference between Canadian and American identity is that Americans are revolutionaries and Canadians are basically British loyalists. This is sort of, the pith and marrow of the difference culturally. And it's basically at this point in the American Revolution is kind of where Canadian and American culture diverges on the question of Britishness and the connection to the old world. So, a couple of decades after the American Revolution, we get the War of 1812, which is where Canadian nationalism really comes into its maturity. And frankly, it's also where American nationalism comes into its maturity. Most Americans, and actually most Canadians, are not aware of this war, but it was pretty important to actually both countries. So what basically happened was that British ships encroached on American sovereignty and trade and everything like that. America declared war on Britain, but obviously it couldn't contest like a naval battle against Britain because, it had a huge advantage. Britain had a huge advantage. So basically the Americans attacked British territory in Canada. And now the Americans had a huge population advantage over Canada, about 15-1. And the British loyalists in Canada, plus confederacy of native tribal allies, managed to actually wreck the Americans. I'm sorry to say, Dave. It was a huge win actually for the Canadians. Although, I mean, okay, it's more complicated than that. There was like a major American victory in like my old stomping grounds of what's now southwestern Ontario, but nothing sort of major east of that, which is kind of where all the action was. But like after Napoleon was defeated in Europe, the British kind of turned their military resources toward the U.S. And this is, I mean, if we're being honest, this is the reason why Canada won the war. Basically, it was Britain that won the war. And the Americans like did very well, though. I mean, let's be honest. They were sort of the underdogs vis-a-vis the British here. And what's kind of funny is at the end of this war, basically nothing had changed. But both sides declared victory effectively. The Americans were like, we're clearly a sovereign nation and fuck you to the British. And Britain said, look, Canada is ours. And we're still basically kind of being assholes on the high seas and encroaching on your maritime rights. So we won. Both sides basically declared victory.
Yeah.
The war kind of had like two main results. the Americans were right in that like the British basically had to like get along with them for the rest of time. But the war also paved the way for Canada to become a nation in its own right and not just a colony. So this is where you kind of get like in this war is where the French and the English finally start to put their differences aside as Canadians. And this is where we get effectively the Canadian ethnogenesis. It's also where Americans get their national anthem from, this war. So it's pretty important. We'll skip. We'll go quickly through the rest of it. Canada gets incorporated in 1867. There were a couple of like Republican rebellions, which is to say gay shit in Canada in the 1830s, but these got crushed. I mean, Canadians are a Tory people. We're a conservative people. Anybody who wanted liberalism or republicanism, the answer was fuck off to America. That's what Canadians said. So the British decided to merge Upper and Lower Canada into a single political unit, and that happened in 1867. It was called the Province of Canada. Basically, it consisted of everything Ontario and east of there. And a few years later, the Métis, which are a mixed people of like French Canadian, but also native background, rebelled a few years later. Most of their demands were actually met, though, and they were incorporated. This was basically Manitoba. And then the construction of the Canadian Pacific Railway kind of like further cemented the unity of Canada. So basically the West got incorporated over this time. We got a lot of foreign immigration at this stage, especially from like India and China. And then World War I comes along and Canadian nationalism really intensifies here because Canada suffered massive casualties during World War I. And Canada's international profile was really raised by the capture of Vimy Ridge by Canadian soldiers. But because of the high casualty rates, basically World War I kind of made Canada decide that it wants to govern its own affairs, really. And so there was a few pieces of legislation passed within the British Parliament that basically declared the Commonwealth Dominions autonomous. At a few decades later, Newfoundland and Labrador incorporate. So this is basically Canada kind of looks recognizable to us now. Several decades later, in 1982, Canada is officially a sovereign nation. The British Crown grants it the right to create its own constitution. Constitutional monarchy is effectively abolished. And it's at this point, actually, that Quebec nationalism starts to become a real thing. Quebec kind of used that occasion of the new constitution to agitate for more influence. Later in the 80s, there was proposal to strengthen provincial powers and declare Quebec a distinct society. But support for that kind of actually collapsed in English Canada. And this basically pissed off the Quebecois. And then there was a few votes to like whether Quebec was going to secede. And one of them only barely lost by like less than 1%. So that gets us into the 1990s and basically into modern history. So that took a while, I'm sorry. But that's Canadian history in a very sort of like condensed form.
Yeah. And for folks that aren't familiar with the War of 1812 and the 7 Years' War and some of these conflicts, because they do get brushed over in history class. 7 Years' War was effectively a world war. This war spilled out in India, where they fought over Calcutta, and there's lots of casualties there. It was in Africa. This was a war that was spilled out all over the world. This was, I guess it's not a world war, but it was like a proto world war.
I would call it a world war. I would put it in that category, like at least, within the spheres of what really mattered in that period of time. Because this is, like I sort of said before, this is where the British Empire comes into its own. This is where it's born, essentially, and it becomes the dominant geopolitical force in the world. It's something that guys have to understand if you want to understand how we got to where we are. So, and Canada has a major role to play in that. Actually, it's one of the major fronts along which that war was fought. So, a point of Canadian pride, but yeah, so the bottom line is with this, extended history lesson is that Canadians are we're a conservative people, but we're also a warlike people. And the Canadian ethnogenesis that happened during that time, especially after and during the War of 1812, is a mix of French, English, and native elements in a way that's kind of like not so. I would say from an outside perspective, it doesn't look like that much it in the US. Like basically we have a kind of like saying in Canada that America is a melting pot and that we in Canada are a mosaic. I disagree with that. I actually think that America is much more of a mosaic. There's much more, apart from Quebec and Canada, I would say in America you get more distinct localities and region and like societies. Like Texas is very different than California, is very different than the Northwest, very different than New York, and very different than et cetera, right? Like I think that America looks more like a mosaic to me, and I think Canada is actually more of a melting pot, more homogenized. Whereas American culture really does demand assimilation. I think Canada's a little bit more like, it's said in Canada that American culture demands assimilation and that Canada's more pluralistic. I think it's the other way around. I think Canadian culture is more uniform and homogenous, even between the French and the English, which is a hard circle to square.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I have friends that, from all over Canada that are like from Vancouver and, Nova Scotia and Ontario. And I can't tell their accents apart. They talk, they all sound the same to me. Whereas, in 30 seconds of hearing an American talk, I can pinpoint, exactly where they're from. I can tell when somebody's from a different county in Pennsylvania, like that. Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe it's just because I'm not from Canada, but that's just, I'm pretty good at pinpointing accents and dialects and stuff like that. And outside of, there's some guys that are from the Maritimes on the East Coast in Canada that have a different accent that sound a little bit different.
That's true, yeah.
But I haven't really come across a lot of those guys on the internet.
I would say, honestly, there are realistically about 4 different like Canadian, because like here's the thing. My take, and this may offend some people, I don't give a fuck, is that America is not one country. It's actually a bunch of different countries that have federated together. But then that's the thing, though, is that's true of Canada as well. Like I don't deny that. But I would say that there's fewer in Canada. There's fewer of these like what are legitimately countries. There's the East Coast, the folks that like ranging from like Nova Scotia, New Brunswick up into like Newfoundland and like PEI and stuff. That's basically like a culture, a distinct culture. Quebec obviously is a distinct culture. Then you've got the sort of you've got like Ontario, and I would sort of, it's hard to say where Manitoba fits, but I would probably fit Manitoba with Ontario in terms of its culture. Then you've got the Western provinces. And by this, I would include, maybe this will offend the few people who live up here, the northern territories as well, the Yukon and Northwest Territories and Nunavut and everything like that. And British Columbia is kind of a weird one. BC, kind of, it's I think a lot of it, geographically is like culturally aligned to the West, but definitely Vancouver and Victoria have the same culture as or similar culture, shall we say, as Toronto and the other metropolitan areas in Canada. So, I mean, you've really only got about 4 what I would think of as very distinct identities without getting down into super localism. But in America, it's like I said, I just named off the top of my head about 5 or 6 of them. You could probably have more. So yeah, I think that Canada is we've, I think, more successfully had an ethnogenesis in terms of it creating a homogenous culture across the country. When I went back after many years of being in Australia, I was really struck, even in southwestern Ontario where I'm from, how fucking strong the French influence is. And nobody speaks French there, but it's still that it is imbued and steeped our culture in Ontario. They've made their mark on Canadian identity, and it's something very different, I think, than American culture. So, yeah, and there's other differences too. There's political differences. Like I say, we're a very conservative people, which is going to strike people as odd to hear because of Justin Trudeau and other shit like that. That is not like Canadian. That is not authentic Canadian identity by any stretch of the imagination. Canada's political history is very much conservative. Like I said, we began basically as British loyalists. And even though nobody really has any love for the British Empire anymore after several generations of it being dead effectively, even though that's the case, we still sort of retain some aspect of this. And I would actually say conservative. See, the reason why it's confusing for me to call it conservatism is because that's the wrong word. Really what it is, I think you have to bring in these terms that I've used in my Substack and elsewhere of Odinic and Tyric. So for guys who have not read the Substack or not familiar with my use of these terms, lightning round version of it, the Odinic is the great man, basically. This is the sort of revolutionary spirit. It comes about once in a while. It's dark, it's explosive, it's creative, it's terrifying. That is the Odinic. Okay. The other side of the coin is the Tyric. So the Tyric is very much more trad, very much more concerned with formality and the exoteric. That's the Tyric. So if for guys who have read Nietzsche, most people understand these terms. You can kind of think of it as a higher resolution version of Apollonian and Dionysiac. Okay, so these are the terms. Odinic is the sort of like dark and revolutionary. Tyric is the light and traditional. Okay, so America is Odinic and Canada is Tyric in this in this framework. Basically, that is the difference between us. Canada went from being this very Tyric sort of Tory country to being liberal. It's a bit of a mystery how that happened. It's hard to say. I mean, even from an inside perspective, Canadian perspective, but you can see this in other parts of history. Something weird happens where the people who are the most like something or other end up becoming the exact opposite. So, for example, the most fucking barbaric people in Europe and European history are probably something like the constellation of peoples that make up the Norse, the Anglo-Saxons, and the Scottish. So you think of like the Norse berserkers and the Anglo-Saxon warriors and Scottish clansmen and things like that, various parts of history. These are the people who are the most barbaric in European history, realistically. And what did they look like today? All of them, without exception, are the most liberal. If it's a historical mystery, if anybody knows how the fuck that happens, please call the office because we need to know. But anyway, what I'm saying is that sometimes people who are the most something end up like transforming completely, and I think this is what happened to Canada. It's very much a Tory country, and now it's super fucking liberal. Some of the influence, of liberalism, if we're being honest, I think it has come from America. I'm not saying that America made Canada gay or whatever. I mean, the whole thing is that the Canada obviously is not gay. Canada is a country of basically rednecks and we're for the most part, Canada is still a very rural country in terms of its spirit and everything. But for the popular version of like what Canada is, I think some of the influence of like what you see there in terms of liberalism is coming from down south, a move away from traditionalism and colonial rule, and a move toward democracy and mass politics. These are sort of like the libertarian influences that are coming from America. But like Canada is, like I say, a very Tyric people, a very a very traditionalist kind of people. We've never had a radical politics in Canada that lasted long, with some minor exceptions. Actually, Antelope Hill put out an interesting book about one of those exceptions. But for the most part, Canada is a nation of centrists. And centrism is awesome when your civilization is healthy. The Tyrrhic is what you want. That's what like most of history is supposed to be. But that's only when the civilization is healthy. So as a result, because we're not radical peoples, we have no way of like righting the ship once it drifts far enough into like territory. Mm-hmm. So even though the Americans have like a more libertarian foundational ideology, because America is Odinic in this, or shall we say Dionysiac in another sense, America can at least revolutionarily temper its excesses. America can hit the reset button, which sometimes you need to do. We can't. And that's kind of the difference between Canada and America. And that's why we've drifted so far into like horrific territory, whereas America has been drifting in that same direction, but has been able to right itself a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, what you're talking about here with the Canada being a very conservative people. When you say conservative, I don't necessarily think of, modern Western,
like Mitt Romney or whatever.
Yeah, I don't think that. I think of the function of what conservatism is, and this doesn't matter what the worldview is, because if you look at, you mentioned all those Germanic peoples that were once considered barbaric and are now just like I don't want to call them a bunch of because there's guys in there that are cool and based and everything like that, but as a society, they have overwhelmingly become the most liberal in lockstep, is because they are conservative. In function, they are conservative. They don't want to upset the social order. They kind of obey the social order. They're a part of it. It's just now, instead of warfaring tribes, they are now the liberal factory. So it's like,
yeah, well, if we're being honest, I mean, that's the thing though. Like, we have to be able to speak frankly about this shit. Canada's the same way. Like, let's be honest, right? Canada has at its foundation an extremely based civilizational ethic. It's just that the ethic is, because of its Toryism, because of its conservatism, because of its non-radical, non-revolutionary politics, has been helpless, basically, to fight against the tide of what is effectively a kind of civilizational entropy that's emanating from elsewhere, right? And it's the same thing with Britain. It's the same thing with the Scandinavian countries, Scotland, and all these places, right? This is the limitation of the Tyrrhic, right? And this is not an episode about, we should do an episode about that framework, but this is not that. But this is just to say that Canada, this is what makes Canada what it is. Canada is sort of the, I don't know, whatever. People take offense to this if they want. Canada is kind of like a Karen. Imagine Karen, but you're a country, right? Like you are in when things are good, when your civilization is healthy, when everything's going as it's supposed to be, when things are right. Karen is the best person in the world. Karen is absolutely the it's the person that you want. You want as many Karens as possible in your society when the society has a strong moral core. But when that's not the case, these Karens kind of tend to turn into the harping, blue-haired, church lady of 2022, right? Like, basically the person that dons a pussy hat and goes out and protests at Trump rallies.
Exactly.
This is kind of what that turns into. So, this is nothing to be ashamed of. I think a Canadian identity is a very strong identity in that it is a very strongly traditionalist identity. It's what, red Toryism is the watchword in Canadian politics. This is basically the red Tory is what Canadian politics is supposed to be. That's the default position. And for guys who don't know what that means, effectively what it is it's the nightmare of the gay liberal order. It is socially right-wing and economically left-wing. that is Canadian. That is the default Canadian position. And over time, it's been supplanted by what's called a blue Tory, which is basically like a libertarian, basically. And this is really unfortunate because the Canadian, like this is effectively, this red Toryism is effectively like the Canadian antibody. This is what keeps everything in line and like fights against like contagions, political and social contagions in our social order, and that has been effectively subverted. So anyway, without going any further into these lamentations about how Canada looks today, I mean, you could say the same thing about America.
Yeah.
The fact is that Canada has an extremely based civilizational ethic at its core, and we have a lot to be proud of. And if and when that gets righted, you're going to see a lot of extremely like dissident right style thought coming out of Canada. And, I like to think that it's no accident that I ended up where I am. I think basically if you think long and hard enough about what it means to be a Canadian, if you think long and hard enough about what it is that our civilizational imperatives as a people are telling you, you end up where I'm at, basically.
Yeah. And also, I do want to clarify so people don't think I'm just like being an American and saying everybody else is gay in America. On the flip side, Americans are, as my old co-host would say, ungovernable, knee-jerk morons, right? We just don't listen to shit all the time. So when things are going well and everything is moral, you have a bunch of dildos that are like, no, I'm not listening to that, which is a fucking problem. But when you come around to like what it is now, when you want everybody wearing masks and shutting down their businesses, those knee-jerk morons then become, that's a positive thing. So it's either or.
It's a very complimentary like position. It's the opposite of what I've just described the Canadian as being, and it's also necessary. It's why this like Apollonian Dionysiac or Odinic Tyrrhic dynamic. It's why the two need each other. It's not like one is good and the other one's bad. That's retarded. The two are complementary. So yeah.
It's just how things are, as opposed to let's try to moralize and look at what's good and what's bad. It's just a function. So with Canadian stuff, when I think of Canadians, I have a very specific view. Now a lot of people that are from like other countries that are kind of outside of North America, a lot of times they kind of just view Americans and Canadians as sort of the same thing. And a lot of Americans just kind of view Canadians as just like kind of Americans. But over the years, since I am a metallologist and a guy that really enjoys different culinary traditions, and I'm a guy that really likes to bring the magnifying glass on things that give cultures uniqueness and stuff like that. I have noticed quite a bit of difference between the Canadian approach to things like music and things like culture and art, et cetera, as opposed to American, right? Some of my favorite like metal bands, for example, that come out of Canada are my favorite metal bands because of how unique they are. And a lot of people don't realize that there is quite a bit of American music movements and stuff like this that started in Canada and got influenced by Canadian culture.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, as Canadians, I think we punch above our weight class in terms of music and art, and especially in comedy. I don't know why that is, but Canadian comedians do very, very well in America. Did you end up watching any of the stuff I sent you, Dave? Did you get a chance?
Yeah, I did.
What did you think of Kids in the Hall?
I've seen Kids in the Hall. It used to, it used to get played here. Canadian humor is like, I can almost always like identify it right away because it's there's a very specific flavor to it. It's not like American comedy. So when you look at Canadian humor and Canadian comedy, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is just my opinion on the outside, is Canadian culture, and we talked about this in our DMs. I view Canadians as almost people that are trying to keep the formalities and etiquettes of Britishness, but are too like too rural and redneck to actually pull it
Yeah.
off, right?
For sure.
And so to them in Canadian society, there is this kind of air of you need this formality. One of the jokes that people make fun of Canadians for all the time is they say sorry too much, right?
Yeah.
And it's a thing that they do. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Sorry, sorry. And they say that because it's like there's this like there's this air of there's this needed social formality to it, whereas Americans are much more blunt and uncaring about whether or not all, but depends on where you go, are different. So when you look at Canadian humor, and a lot of times humor is based in absurdity, Canadian comedy is very much pulls from this idea of like social awkwardness, right? They think social awkwardness, social absurdity, things that are a little bit like just dry and like it's almost sort of like British humor, but different, right? So it's like that's kind of what I get from it. Would that be an accurate statement?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could say, tongue in cheek somewhat, that like Canadian humor is like, Canadians are kind of like redneck aristocrats in some way, right? Like we are that awkward blend between like the British formalism, like I said, the Toryism, which is part of that, but also we are a colonial people. We're a people on the outskirts of the empire, right? We are not really aristocrats, but we still have some of that sort of like blood in us. We still have some of those like mannerisms and things like that. So I totally get that. I think of the Kids in the Hall as basically the Canadian version of Monty Python.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of the same humor, but it's different. Like Monty Python was very cerebral and everything like that. Kids in the Hall, it's also very 90s. So I mean that colors it as well. It's very Gen X, very sarcastic and like kind of like just random, there's a lot of just shit in there that just like the head crusher guy, like that's not really it's just like something fucking completely random, and that's like a huge part of like Canadian culture, or a huge part of like the Canadian sense of humor. But I've also noticed as well that there is a kindred spirit between Canadian humor and Australian humor. It's very much the same thing here, and it probably comes from being a pioneer people thrown into an extremely hostile environment. Like that's the only, other than the Britishness, which we share with Americans, frankly, that's like the only kind of, I think, commonality, really. The main commonality between Australians and Canadians is that we're a people who have survived within an austere environment. And for some reason, that just makes us like have this, crazy ass sense of humor. I don't know what it is, but definitely the Australians have it too. It's kind of like, I wish I could give an example, but like when I'm listening to like Australian talk radio, which I used to do a lot more when I got here, I noticed the same sort of sense of humor. It's like, the guy would be like saying something on an advertisement or whatever, but like he would get it like a little bit wrong, and it would just like kind of be like it's like listening to a redneck trying to punch, trying to talk like above his class or something like that. It's the same kind of humor or whatever. But yeah, as for the politeness thing, I think it's interesting, and it's definitely a Canadian trope. Are we polite? Yeah, of course we are. But again, we are more. I hate to keep using this, but we are more Tyric. We're more like mannered and formalized and traditional in some ways. But Tyric peoples tend to have a long fuse, and I, as a person, myself individually, I have a very long fuse. But when that fuse runs out, it's like you need to fucking run away as fast as you can. You do not fuck with the quiet guy, especially if he's a European and he's smart. That is a mistake, right? And if you want to see what happens when you fuck with the Tyric people, and I mean really fuck with them, look what happened with the Romans in the Punic War. The Romans are one of the archetypal Tyric peoples, very conservative, very trad, very formulaic, very mannered, and very polite, for their time and place. But what happened when the Carthaginians fucked with them? The short answer is that a whole people ceased to exist. That's what happened. The Romans were exterminators, just like our native tribes, just like the Iroquois Confederation and the Beaver Wars that I mentioned. Like this, it's why, we have, we've got a Jim Carrey on the one hand, but we've also got a Paul Bernardo on the other hand. Like we are a very sort of light and dark people. There's a lot of difference to us in that sense. But yeah, speaking of the Iroquois and speaking of the like native tribes and everything like that, I think that Canadians have had such a complete synthesis of like European and native culture. I was talking about the Métis before, French Catholics who are like half native or whatever. That I think when you get this admixture of cultures, this very like wide difference, you tend to get something that's a real throwback to the common ancestor of the two. And actually, this is a well-attested principle in biology. Like if you cross two pigeons that are like fairly widely, divergent in their family tree, what you're going to probably get is you're going to get the last common ancestor between them. So, whatever that happens to be in terms of color, that's what you'll get. And I think this is what happens in cultures. Basically, if you get two cultures that are very different, that are widely divergent, and that you mix them together, you're going to get something that looks very archaic out of it. And I think in some ways that is the Canadian identity as well, because we are a bit of a mix between native Canadians, native North Americans who crossed the Alaskan land bridge during the last ice age, as well as Europeans who are descended ultimately through the ancient North Eurasian complex, but through this huge span of time diverged and now have come back together in Canadians. So I think this is also part of the conservatism, part of the Apollonian aspect of who we are and everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I was thinking, speaking of Jim Carrey, I just watched, it just popped on. I don't know what it was. Do you remember the show In Living Color that he was on?
Yeah.
He was the only white guy. It was a black comedy show. It was the only white guy. And every single skit that this guy was on, he just like stuck out like a sore thumb. And I remember watching this and thinking back, like when I first saw it, and I was like, still in my mind, like, why did they cast this goofy Canadian guy that stuck out like a sore thumb? And I realized I identified Jim Carrey. Now, obviously, as he goes on in his career, he kind of loses his Canadianness, right?
Yeah.
But early on, he very much had that Canadian vibe about him. And there's something about Canadian art that has this, and I think this is why Americans like it so much, is it always has this little bit of vibe of weirdness, right? It's like this combination of kind of like weird awkwardness and kind of, I guess, I don't know what another word for it, experimental. It's very experimental. And every Canadian, let me tell you, you're not just the only one. Every Canadian that I know that's really big into music loves experimental everything, right?
I don't know what it is about us. There is that part. I was saying before, we don't have radical politics, but we certainly have radical art. And I don't know why the fuck that is.
I don't know. It's something that is now, obviously there is experimental American stuff, and there's everything American stuff because there's so many different whatever, but it's not nearly as prevalent. You go on a list of Canadian bands, you click on every Canadian band, each one is doing something weird. None of them are like really doing like for example, Canadian metal is what I know the most about. So some of the best Canadian metal bands you can go, like bands like Annihilator. You got there's a Canadian band that I like a lot called Quo Vadis. They're a really underground band. Like I believe that they're out of Quebec. Actually, half the guys are like French. But then there's another Canadian band that's really, really great called Into Eternity. And these bands, if you just like listen to their music, this is music that probably wouldn't come out of America because it is so like different. It's so radically experimental. The band Into Eternity, for example, is this like they're sort of a melodic death metal band, but they have like these thrash elements. The vocalist named Stu Block, who actually is now with Iced Earth, but the vocalist Stu Block is this like tremendous vocalist, but he does like all of like the soaring power metal vocals, the falsettos and all that, but he's also an extremely talented death metal vocalist that has high screams and low growls, and he combines all of it together into these songs, and they do all these harmonies. It's almost like you're listening to like death metal Boston or something. It's really, really different. And this is something that can be said across the board for Canadian music. Rush, for example, which Rush approaches music very much. And here's the thing with Canadian music is they do approach it in a very British kind of way. It has the sensibilities of British music, but it's also experimental. It's not Americans. When we make music, we come at it and we kind of like want to take one thing. We don't want to really like want to rock the boat with formula too much, but we take one aspect and we crank it up to 10 and we kind of just do it as hard as we can, right? We just want to go hard. It doesn't matter if we're talking, heavy metal music or rock and roll or whatever across the board. We just want to go hard. The Canadians do something. They have like a different approach to music, and I've always really appreciated it.
Yeah, we are definitely like, we have a lot of experimental shit going on. I myself, like, being ensconced in a local music scene in Canada, pretty much immediately sought out the most extreme, the most like experimental, the most fucked up, the most interesting, the most daring stuff that was going on. It's just who we are. And I don't pretend to be able to explain it, because again, what I was saying before, us being a sort of more, Apollonian people or Tyrrhic or whatever you want to call it, conservative, whatever, doesn't really fit much with this. But of course, cultures are complicated. Peoples are not, they're not these archetypes. There's the definite complexity to them and everything like that.
I can tell you what I think it is, why they do that is, Canadian, from at least from my perspective, looking in, Canadian everyday life seems to be much more quiet and mundane and less I don't know what the word is for it, but if you just like live in Canada and you go to the store and you go to work and blah, 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 it's not very often you're going to see guys spurging out. There's not a whole lot of road rage. You're not going to see guys just fighting. Nobody's going to curse you. And maybe probably sometimes, but it's not like here in America where,
just not as much.
Yeah. You could go down into, rural Texas. And if you cut a little bit of lip to the guy at the gas station, he could tell you to go fuck yourself, and like you guys could get into a fight. You know what I mean? It's not like that in Canada. So because their lives are much more, have a lot more politeness and sensibility, and are a little bit more mundane, and also they're a lot. This goes into it a lot, in my opinion, too. Is that even here in America, we have a lot of spread out space. There's people, I talk to my European friends and I, tell them where I grew up. And I was like, yeah, my closest neighbor was half a mile away. And they think that that's crazy. In Canada, it's like that times 10. For most of the people that live in Canada, there's this kind of like sense of isolation. They're kind of under socialized. So it's like, there's this like it's this whole different kind of vibe. So because of the isolated nature and the mundaneness of their lives and the kind of formality, when they come to the board to create art, whether it's music or comedy or whatever, movies, they want to do something that's absurd and experimental and weird. So I think that's part of what goes into it.
Oh yeah, most definitely. And I'm going to try and do a nice segue here. I think that's also the case. The experimentalism it goes back, into the 19th century, into our sort of like deeper history as a people, even into our sport, where in Canada, obviously, basically half of Canadian identity is loving hockey. And hockey is itself a very interesting sport in terms of how it developed and everything like that. It seems to have been effectively a European invention, but in Canada, it was sort of like merged with some of the. It took some influence from the native lacrosse, what became lacrosse, which was actually itself it has an interesting sort of birth story where it started out as effectively a kind of war game and everything like that, and that guys like, the native people who would like play lacrosse would take it very, very seriously indeed with, if the loser would basically like get the shit kicked out of him after the match, because it was basically a sort of like preparation for war kind of thing. And hockey took a lot of that on as well. And it sort of changed very radically from what it looked like initially, and changed through the 19th century and everything like that. So, I mean, hockey is our game. Hockey is a huge part of who we are as a people. And it is very much, it stands in contrast in some ways to the Canadian character. So, I mean, maybe one of the things that could be said about us is that we are a people of contradiction, because, of course, we are these quiet, polite guys, but get us on the rink at 5 a.m. on the ice and we'll beat the fuck out of you, and we will just hammer you into the boards, and a puck will come sailing into your teeth at like 70 miles an hour. That's the Canadian game. You would think that a polite people wouldn't play such a rough and tumble game that's so fast and dynamic, but that's just who we are. And it's an important part. It's a huge, huge part of Canadian identity. I can remember myself growing up. The smell of diesel in the morning still reminds me. It has a wonderful connotation. I love that smell, the smell of diesel fuel burning, because it smells like the Zamboni, right, in the rink. And it's an interesting game because unlike pretty much any other game, the whole point of like what you're supposed to do in hockey is you get on the ice. You just go for 45 seconds until you want to puke as hard as you fucking can, as violently as you can within the framework of the rules. And then you get off the ice and you recover. And then about 90 seconds later, you get back on and you go hard again and everything like that. So it's a very unique sport. Hockey is a super fucking intense sport. That's why it's so interesting to watch. That's why it's so popular. And it's our game. This is a huge part of what it means to be us.
Yeah, and also a lot of people don't realize that Canada was actually a pretty strong spot for American-style football for a long time. Canadian Football League, was a big deal for quite a while. I'm not sure how it is culturally there. I'm sure it's not as big as hockey. It's obviously not as big as hockey, but for like years,
it's still pretty big. Yeah.
Yeah, for years and years, up until like the absolute takeover of the NFL worldwide, back when we had multiple football leagues in America. You had USFL and you had the NFL, and then you had the AFL, and you had all these different teams. Canadian Football League was like one of the contenders, right? And then after when NFL came out, if you were a football player and you didn't get drafted, the next best thing was to go to the Canadian Football League, because it was almost as good. So many great football players like, Warren Moon, Doug Flutie, guys that got overlooked because, Doug Flutie got overlooked because he was like 5'0", but he went to play in the CFL. I don't know if guys remember, there's a football player came out sort of recently and kind of stunk it up in the NFL. Johnny Manziel. He went up there. I don't watch sports ball anymore, but Canadian football for a long time was kind of like the second place to NFL.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting, like, because you could hardly get two more different sports than football and hockey. Football is a game. It's very, very strategic. The coach has a very important role to play, like, within the framework of the match itself. Calling the shots and everything like that, and it's very much like set plays and everything. Guys have a very well defined role. Hockey is very different. Hockey is very dynamic and fast paced. You could the goalie could in principle go and score a goal. Like if you're a Ron Hextall, you could go and that might happen in the middle of a game or whatever. So I mean the positions are much less sort of formulaic or whatever. They're two very different games, but Canadians really do excel at American style football or CFL. The difference in the rules are not that much. I mean, I forget what they are now. I think the CFL has 3 downs instead of 4 and a bigger field. I think those are the main differences between the the game. But that's a big part of Canadian identity as well. I played football. I played, this sport for years. I played hockey for longer. I played soccer for longer. Soccer's very big in Canada, whereas in the US, not so much. Not at least last time I looked, which was like 20 fucking years ago. So yeah, we definitely have we hold our own in terms of football. I'm just fucking tempted to call it American style football because I've been living in Australia now for a while, and they have their own football. It's nothing like, the CFL or the NFL.
Soccer, or is it like rugby?
It's like rugby, but it's not like they have rugby too. This is a completely different game. It's actually quite interesting, but it's its own thing.
Is that the State of the Union thing that they do?
I don't know what you mean by that.
They have like a big, they call it football, but they have like this big Super Bowl event where it's like New South Wales versus Queensland, and they get together and they play this like big giant like Super Bowl type game. I think
I think you're talking about the AFL Grand Final. That would be, I think that's it. Yeah, it's a different game altogether. I actually could not at first tell it apart from rugby, but it is very different. And rugby is very different for us, or very strong for us as well in Canada. I played rugby in high school. I played all these different sports. That's the thing, is I think I get the impression, and I could be very wrong, that in America, you basically you play football, you play basketball, or you play baseball. And that's about that. Those are the main, or hockey, I guess, and in the US. And those are the main sports. For us, it's quite different. I mean, we do play a lot of baseball. We've obviously got some Major League Baseball teams in Canada. But for us, for the most part, it's those ones I mentioned. It's hockey. That's by far the number one. It's football. Soccer is very big, and rugby is in there too as well. So it's a bit of a different mixture, a different profile of sporting culture in Canada. But it's its own thing. It's kind of interesting, I think.
The thing I was talking about is state of origin. State of origin. For folks that haven't checked it out, that are fans of cool sporting events, Australia has a really cool one called State of Origin, and these guys go hard. They fucking smash each other. It's pretty based.
Yeah. Oh, it's cool. I mean, rugby is such a fucking deadly sport. It really is. And actually, that's kind of what hockey looked like when it was in its early stages, when it was just sort of getting going in the 19th century. It really looked sort of like a rugby scrum on the ice. So yeah, we have our own sporting culture. It's a little bit different, and I think it's kind of unique and worthy of investigation in its own right. But another thing that we have to mention before the end of this thing is, in terms of music, we have to talk about the Tragically Hip, which is something that most people don't know. I mean, this is basically what the hip are for Canadian music. Is they're like Led Zeppelin or something in Canada. They are just basically huge. I mean, this is a huge part of Canadian identity because the lyrical content is there's a lot of Canadiana in it. There's a lot of Canadian culture. There's a lot of references to places and events and historical things that have happened in our culture. These are our guys, basically. So but for the most part, unlike Rush, unlike a lot of these other, Neil Young and the band and other musical acts that are well known outside of Canada, the Tragically Hip are virtually unknown. I was half expecting when I mentioned them to you, Dave, that you'd be like, "Oh fuck yeah, I've heard of them," because you're close enough to the Canadian border, but you hadn't heard of them, and that's actually in some ways not a surprise. So this is the Tragically Hip. Anybody who is a music fan and have not heard of them, this is you got to go check this out. You'll hear a really important slice of Canada in some of their music. And what I'm going to do, I sent Dave a playlist. I'm gonna put the link to the playlist in the show notes for this show, so the guys can go check that out. But did anything else that I put in there kind of stand out to you in that list, or did you get a chance to listen to the music list?
Yeah, I actually let me bring it up here and point out exactly what because I sat and I listened when I was working. I listened to the whole thing. So let me see if I can bring it up here. You were sending me tons of Canadian stuff, Canadian TV, like all kinds. I watched a lot of this. I'm already familiar with. You sent me like the Red Green show. The guy does everything with duct tape. My dad used to think that was hilarious.
Yeah.
Let me see. I can't find the link. Here we go. Okay, let me open this up real quick. But yeah, I love Canadian music because I think it gets overlooked quite a bit. Oh, hang on. Yeah, so you got the Tragically Hip in here. I actually went through and I listened to quite a bit of the Tragically Hip. I listened I typed it into YouTube and it like lit up like a Christmas tree.
Yeah.
I was like, how is it that I've never even, because I'm a music guy, you know what I mean? The fact that I like never heard this was like so shocking to me. And I don't know where on the timeline these guys pop up, but I was like, this sort of sounds like the beginnings of grunge music. Is that where was this inspirational to grunge music, or was this kind of during that time?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say that it was inspirational to grunge. Like, I don't think there's any influence there, but it was happening at the same time. Their first like EP came out in 1987. So this was about the same time the grunge bands would have started. Soundgarden's first EP came out in 1987 as well. But what the Tragically Hip are, for the most part, what I sent you, I think I sent you all songs from their 1992 album, Fully Completely, which is the one where it does really sound very 90s. But they're basically a bar band. The one song that like a lot of people have heard by them is this one called New Orleans is Sinking. And they're basically like a kind of like bar band that like got really big or whatever. And especially their first few albums sound a lot. They have that sound. It's very bluesy, very much like a kind of like, you know, raw gig down at like the Kingston Hotel or something like that. So that's the Tragically Hip. I think of them as kind of like that. Now on the 1992 album, that's basically their fucking White Album or whatever. They're like that's their Zeppelin 4. It's awesome. Like if anybody wants to check them out, I would just say go listen to the album. It's called Fully Completely. There was like 6 or 7 songs that were like radio smash hits in Canada. That's the one to check out. I sent a few songs of that on the playlist to Dave. But I also sent you some other Canadian stuff as well, that some of it's a little bit more obscure. Some of it, I actually sent you one, this Boards of Canada, which is not a Canadian act. It's actually a Scottish electronic duo. But what they tried to do was to recreate the sound of the 1970s National Film Board of Canada soundtracks, which used a lot of weird analog synthesizers. It just has a very, very strong aesthetic vibe about it. It's very 70s. It's very washed out. It's very psychedelic and crazy. And this like electronic duo tried to recreate that, even though they weren't Canadian, because it is such a striking sound. So that's one of them. Let's see, what else did I put on this list here? I put some shit on.
My favorite one that you put on the list here was the Mother Earth Rain Will Fall.
Yeah, I thought you'd like that one.
That was such a cool rock song.
Yeah, for sure. I Mother Earth was a huge deal in 1990s in Canada. This is like off of their first album called Dig. It probably came out in 1993, I would guess. And it was very fucking heavy for the time. Basically, what I Mother Earth is it's like, you know, their singer had this like really raspy kind of voice. Great rock singer, very lots of charisma, but the instrumental like trio that like was kind of like backing him or whatever was kind of like this like metal version of Santana or something like that.
Yeah,
like they had some crazy ass like almost like funky stuff going on, but it was like super hard, super fucking hard. We're not talking about like Fishbone like funk metal or anything like that. It's like, although I don't mind that. I don't mind fucking Chili Peppers and Primus. I love Primus, but anyway, this is a little bit different. They're very like they're pretty hard actually on this first album, and I sent you the song Rain Will Fall, which is like, I don't know, it's kind of reminds me in some ways of like, it's just like that machine gun aggression that you get out of like Soundgarden's Jesus Christ Pose or something like that. Like it's very, and even like the visual aesthetic of the video, it's like it's got the quick sort of like cuts like in the desert and everything like that. It's really cool. That's really cool. Another one that I sent that I think we have to talk about is 5440. Did that one stand out to you at all? One Gun for 5440, because they're another band that's kind of like the Tragically Hip, where they're just sort of like part of the they are part of the like the background of Canadian identity. They're just a very, very important sort of sound. I think of them actually in some ways as kind of like Canada's REM. They remind me a lot. I don't know what it is, just the way that the songwriting is put together. They remind me of REM, and what they are, it's hard to describe them because they're just basically sort of like a mid-tempo rock band. They're an alternative rock band. They're pretty straight ahead. There's nothing really crazy about them, but their songwriting is just very, very solid. And there are so many great songs. Actually, you probably have heard one of them that was unfortunately covered by Hootie and the Blowfish many years later. That's called "I Go Blind." They did it better. It's a great song. They've had a lot of great songs, actually. 5440. I also put some other shit on there that I think is really like you have obviously heard Bryan Adams' "Run to You." That was probably no mystery. When I first got to Australia, I had never heard more fucking Bryan Adams in my life than when I first got off the plane and like went into a shopping mall in Australia. Australians fucking love Bryan Adams, and
really?
I don't know what it is.
That's so weird.
Yeah.
Why?
I don't
He's
know.
okay. There's nothing wrong with him. But
I like Bryan Adams. I think he's a good songwriter. Most of his stuff is pretty, whatever. But like he has some great songs. He's got a great voice. I think he's actually got an amazing voice. Now,
yeah,
I think the reason. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying he's good. He's definitely good.
Yeah, he's not like my favorite. Like I wouldn't like chuck on some Bryan Adams and like, rock out to it or anything like that. I don't have any of his albums or anything, but that's a good song. He's got a few good songs. I think the reason why Australians like him is that he's just so fucking 80s. And for some reason, I don't know what it is, Australian culture is kind of like stuck in the 80s. Like for some reason. I think it's because like you come here. If you come here, Dave, you're going to see more mullets than you've seen in your entire life.
Based.
It is based, actually. It's fucking hilarious. But there's a definite like 80s, like the 80s never really died here. It's actually kind of fucking cool. And Bryan Adams is very strong in the 80s. So that was one. I sent you the Stompin' Tom hockey song. That's a must. Like you probably have heard that before, but
yeah,
if you hadn't, it's a slice of Canada for sure. What else did I throw on there? I threw on Rush. We talked about Rush.
Yeah,
I threw some weird.
Neil Young, Bare Naked Ladies. Those were popular here. Yeah, I listened to everything on here. A couple of them were like, I was like, it was kind of a little bit struggle to get through. The here is called "I'm to Blame," and you have the Matthew Good Band. Those were like a struggle for me. Yeah,
those were everything. Yeah. And then at the end, I threw something fucked up on. I threw something like you were talking about experimental shit. I threw some real fucking experimental shit at the end. Godspeed You Black Emperor. They are a 9-piece like instrumental post-rock band. At the end of the playlist, I threw on the song East Hastings, and this is from their first. I think it's an album, might be an EP. It's got a weird title, and basically what it is it's like a 12-minute like apocalyptic. I mean, all of their shit that they do is instrumental, but this very apocalyptic sounding track that begins with a bagpipe solo over the sounds of like a street preacher ranting incoherently on East Hastings, which is the Vancouver infamous neighborhood in Vancouver, which is basically Skid Row. It's like probably the worst neighborhood in Canada, at least for like drugs and dereliction and just like degeneracy. Basically, it is. Anybody who's been there, actually, it's probably cleaned up since I left Canada. Probably it's been gentrified, but it was pretty fucking bad. And anyway, this is the Godspeed You Black Emperor. They're they're very well known amongst like, guys who like read fucking Pitchfork and stuff like that. Like guys who are really into their like music criticism and really into their.
What's Pitchfork?
Pitchfork is like basically the Tastemaker magazine of like indie rock and like, all that shit. But like Godspeed is pretty good, man. Like I like them. I got into them, years ago. I think not all of it's amazing, but like the first album or two is really cool. It gets kind of sameish over time. But it's this dark, experimental, weird shit that like Canadians are just really good at. We're just really fucking good at it. I don't know what it is, but Godspeed is that. Yeah. So anyway, it's a fairly short list. I think it's only about like, 12 like or so songs, 12 or 13 songs in the list. A good sort of slice of Canadiana. Actually, that Tea Party one, I threw on the Tea Party, Sun Going Down. And I kind of regretted it because that is actually not a very representative song of theirs. They're very much like, did you guys ever get the Tea Party in America where you were? Did you ever heard of this band?
No, I'd never even heard of them.
All right. So this is basically, I should have thrown another song on because what it is it's basically a 3-piece. It's like a power trio that is really like, it's just basically like the Canadian version of Led Zeppelin. And by that, I mean the sound of Led Zeppelin. With Jim Morrison singing for them. It's got a 90s feel to it. It's used a lot of Eastern sort of musical tonalities, Eastern like instruments, a lot of acoustic stuff going on. They're a great fucking band, man. Like I miss that. I like that's their first 1 or 2 albums. First one's called Splendor Solis. That's the one I like the most. The second one's great too. I forget the name of it, but they're awesome, man. Like anybody who likes kind of weird shit should check them out, especially guys who like retro sounding stuff. They definitely are like, they have a 90s vibe, but they've got the spirit of like Zeppelin and the Doors and stuff like that. They're fucking great. And this
I actually like this song. I thought this was a pretty good song.
Yeah, it's a great song. It's just a real like, it's a acoustic slide like blues kind of track. It's very loose and like it's fucking awesome, man. That whole album just rules. Splendor Solis. I would recommend it to anybody, especially if you like the old shit.
Did you get a chance to I don't know if you're familiar with or got a chance to listen to a couple of the links that I sent you?
Which one? Let me pull that up here.
Annihilator and Pat Travers.
I'll be honest, I did not. I completely forgot about. I'm sorry.
It's all good. Yeah, Annihilator is like this. This is another example of Canadian experimentalism. They're a Canadian thrash band. They were around in the 80s, but they did a lot of really awesome like guitar work and wrote these like really they had these like beautiful acoustic passages and like during the time of like Rain and Blood and like Sepultura and like all this other, like when thrash was getting heavier, these guys were like mixing in more melodic stuff. And they were just a really great band. I sent you that their most popular song, which is Alice in Hell, which is a really, really good song. Really great thrash. It's one of the thrash masterpieces, right? And then I also sent you Pat Travers, which Pat Travers was like a rock and roll shredder kind of guy. I guess he was kind of like a who would, I don't know if there's like a George Thorogood kind of guy. Okay. Or like a Ted Nugent kind of guy, I guess you could say. Yeah, Pat Travers was really, really based.
Nice. Well, I'm sorry I can't comment on them. I'll definitely check them out afterwards. The other thing I sent to you, I don't know if you got a chance to watch this, but I would recommend it to the audience anyway, is Paddle to the Sea. Now, this is something... It's a little bit different. We're going to shift gears from like, talking about heavy shit and like experimental music and everything. What this is basically it's a novel or a novella that was adapted by one of these National Film Board of Canada into a short film, about 20 minutes or so. And it's really cool. I mean, basically it's just a little story about a kid who carves a wooden Indian on a canoe and then sends this thing. He just chucks it into the water, and it's about the the journey of this little wooden Indian toy all the way. He chucks it into Lake Superior, and eventually it makes its way into the Atlantic Ocean. And it's the journey of this little thing all the way through like a whole bunch of Canadian landmarks. And it gives you that vibe. It gives you the vibe I was talking about with the boards of Canada. That is the sort of like vibe and feel of, Canada in the 1970s kind of thing, which I obviously didn't experience, but it's a very strong aesthetic. It's just a nice story. I watch it with my kids. They love it. They request it, quite a lot. And if they forget about it, I'll chuck it on, and then they'll request it again for like months. They love this little piece. So that's a nice piece of Canadiana, sort of like children's culture or whatever. I would recommend that, guys watch it if you get a chance to check it out. I don't know how far the Red Green show traveled. I could see that you mentioned that your dad used to watch it or whatever. I doubt that it was probably run in like New York City or like in Florida or like other. It's probably just a sort of like, the states that border the Canadian border got it, and that's about it back in the day. But that is for a lot of people, the Red Green show is very much sort of like that's what Canada just is. And what it is it's this guy who like is a kind of like old, like, older character, like in his 50s or whatever, with like a big bushy beard and a gravelly voice. He's like a Canadian redneck that runs a hunting lodge with like a bunch of like, other hick characters and everything like that. And they just go through these like little segments of like, he's giving you advice on like how to repair your car, but he does it like in this retarded way that like somehow works, but it just like accidentally works, and he uses duct tape on everything. And it's just, that's a real Canadian institution, the Red Green show. So sometimes when I'm feeling like I really miss home or whatever, I'll chuck on the Red Green show, and that's like, it just sends me right back there. And of course it's like in the right time for me. It started in 1991. This was a good time. So yeah, I would recommend that to guys as well. This sort of like cross section of things: Red Green show, Kids in the Hall. We didn't talk about Trailer Park Boys.
Oh man, I love Trailer Park Boys.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about, man. I mean, this is what I'm saying. I think Canadian culture really punches above its own weight. There's a lot of cool shit that comes out of Canada. All the comedians, all the music, all the art. We didn't get a chance to talk about George Grant, who is basically our sort of national philosopher. He's a really cool person as well, cool thinker. But, he's like that red Tory. He's the guy that like basically doesn't exist anymore. He wrote in the 60s and 70s. Interesting character, very much worth reading. And yeah, he really does embody that sort of Tyrrhic spirit of Canada, that conservative, but not conservative in the Mitt Romney way, conservative in the like, Cato the Elder kind of way. Like it's the real conservatism, the real, socially right wing and like economically left wing aspect that he kind of like really embodies that. And he's actually he's very well respected in the philosophical community as well. He's a deep thinker. Yeah, so I mean that's a good little cross section of Canadian culture for guys to check out. It's a very rich culture. I would say that because I'm from there. I'm immensely proud to be Canadian. And you know what? It's very sad to say not many Canadians are. Even when I was growing up, which was decades ago now, fucking like nationalism in Canada was very weak even back then. I can only imagine what it's like amongst Zoomers now. It's I don't even want to think about it. But Canadians have a lot to be proud of. We're a people with a very strong cultural identity, and it's unfortunate that it doesn't get recognized because it has its own flavor. Anybody who comes to Canada falls in love with it basically because it's got its own thing going on, and it's something to be proud of.
Yeah. Another thing I think that should be mentioned that doesn't get enough love out of Canada is Canadian comfort foods are fucking lit. They're great. Everybody knows about the poutine, and I know that's the kind of like a meme, but dude, the poutine is lit. It is a fucking awesome. It's like a bar food, but what's cool about it is if you go up in Canada, like different regions have their own poutines, different bars will have their own spin on it. This guy will do this kind of thing with it. And it's effectively just French fries with gravy, deep fried cheese curds, and like other stuff, So it's just like, it's just an awesome food. Another thing that I really appreciate, I got to bring this up. This is probably my favorite part about Canadian food. As a Pennsylvanian, right? In PA, we are serious about potato chips. We don't fucking play here. Don't come to PA and try to give me some Lay's or some fucking Pringles or some other bullshit. I only eat kettle cooked potato chips, Dutch style. And if you
That's
try
what
to
we're about, baby. We're all about that shit.
I will really be offended if you try to give me some garbage like that. So when I go somewhere else, I scoff. I look down at my nose at the filthy at the refuse that they call potato chips. When I went to Canada, I was impressed. Not only was I impressed by the type of potato chips that they make there, but I was blown away with how crazy they get with the flavors.
Yeah.
I ketchup chip. Here's another thing
do you guys have ketchup chips in America, or is that just not a thing?
It's starting to become a thing because of Canadian influence.
Okay. Because that was always like huge for us. Like ketchup chips was just like one of about 3 or 4 staple flavors that like you'd have your all dressed, you'd have your ketchup chips, you'd have your your original flavor and barbecue and like it's just like it's part of the wallpaper of like Canadian potato chip culture, I guess. That's just like it's just part of it, you know what I mean? So we don't even think of that as weird. That's just normal for us. But for you guys, you don't get that, I guess, eh?
No, you come to America, you get barbecue and sour cream and onion, salt and vinegar, and if you're on the East Coast, you can get crab chips, and like that's about it. Canadians like fucking ketchup everything. They like, I thought ketchup was only like an American, because it is an American invention. It came out the Heinz, what's his name, Henrik John Heinz or whatever. He's from PA, invented it. Canadians love ketchup. Right? I don't know what it is.
Yeah. Well, my kids fucking love it, man. They must be in our blood. I could basically like just open up that fucking ketchup bottle and they'll just chug the shit. Like they fucking love it. You know what I mean?
They use ketchup in Australia?
Oh yeah, but they call it tomato sauce here, and it's very, very confusing because when I try to make a fucking recipe, sometimes it actually is kind of ambiguous. Like whether it's tomato sauce, does it mean ketchup or does it mean fucking pasta sauce? Sometimes it could be either one. But anyway, they call it tomato sauce here, but they use it. It's a big thing here too, for sure.
Yeah. Another thing you guys should try if you go to Canada. I'm a big fan of Bloody Marys. They do a different kind of Bloody Mary up there. What's it called? They call it a Caesar.
The Caesar. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, it is. I can't say that it's better than a Bloody Mary, but it is kind of better than a Bloody Mary. It is fantastic.
Yeah. I don't drink that stuff, so I don't know. I'm not a big fan of tomato juice, to be honest.
Oh man.
But that is a definite Canadian thing, like getting a Caesar at the bar. That's kind of like, if you're kind of like that's when you want to stop slumming it. That's when you want to do like, a cut above, when you kind of want to like, look a little bit more aristocratic, you'll drink something like that or whatever.
And also another thing, beer.
Oh yes. Canadians, like, I'm not a big drinker, so I mean, I'm not the one to speak on this. Probably most Canadians would be better on this than I am. But Canadian beer is excellent. It's renowned. Now, I'm not talking about that fucking like, Molson Canadian shit, or even that like Labatt Blue, which is like whatever, I don't know. But there are some like real serious. I think craft beer was like a thing in Canada probably earlier than most places. But there's some excellent beers. I like a nice, like, I'm not a stout guy. I don't drink like heavy beers, like a big gooey fucking milkshake. That's not what I'm about. I like a nice, India. I like a nice pale ale. I like a nice lager. And my favorite beer by far in Canada is Moosehead.
Oh yeah,
that's fucking awesome.
Moosehead. Yeah,
that's Oh, that's the shit, man. And like, what makes Moosehead's a little dangerous because it's like it just tastes. I'd sell it short by saying it tastes like water, but you can drink it like water. Like it just goes down so smooth and so easy, and it's just so nice. But it's like 5%, so like
Yeah.
you're gonna get hammed, and that's one of the things that I like. That I notice about like American beer. I'm sorry to say, it's just too fucking weak. Like when I was playing in punk bands and metal bands and shit like that, I would get myself a tall can of Black Label Supreme, and this is like 8 or 9 fucking percent, dude. And like this is what we would drink. Like that's a pretty normal fucking Canadian thing to do or whatever. Like, fill me in here, Dave. Like what's like a mid-strength American beer? What percentage are we looking at?
Well, when people say American beer is weak, what they're talking about is what I call the Mick beers. And the Mick beers are your Budweisers, your Coors Lights, your Miller, et cetera, et cetera. These aren't like real beers. This is like they like drink it. Not so much anymore because they're starting to develop beer culture, but they only really drank this shit in the South. Up in the North, where we've had beer culture for a long time. For example, I'm from PA. Pennsylvanians, like once in a while, you'll find guys that are drinking that kind of shit, but we have our own beers. You come here, you drink a Yingling Lager, right?
Yeah.
Yingling Lager. You drink, we have Rolling Rock here. Those are kind of like the standard mid-shelf beers, and these are coming in around about 5%.
That's respectable. I can respect that.
And then if you go, and then you go into the micro brews, which, when you talk about micro brews and craft beers and stuff like that, here in PA, that's always been a thing. Like it's not like this new age phenomenon where a bunch of hipsters are doing it or whatever. It's just something that has been in our culture forever and ever. So if you get like where I'm from, kind of the like microbrewery is Trogs, and some of these beers are pretty gnarly. Like one of my favorites out of them, they have a seasonal one for the holidays actually coming up. It's called Mad Elf, and it's like 12%. You got they got Troganator, which is a double bock. You probably wouldn't like that. It's a darker beer. That's coming in at like 9%. These are pretty strong beers, but the idea of like the weak, like piss beer stuff, the American Mick beer, that's like those are recipes that were created during during Prohibition, right? So these are just like it's just like shitty mainstream, saying that Budweiser is an American beer is like saying McDonald's is American cuisine.
Yeah, and I mean, like we've got our own beers like that. Like, I think there will be guys that will get on my case for like shitting on Molson Canadian. I don't like it. It gives me a fucking headache. But it's 5%. I mean, it's like 4.5-5% on average or something like that. So it's respectable. But Canada has much better beers than that. I mean, that's like like you say, those are the mainstream ones. Those are the sort of like ones that everybody knows. There's like I don't really count a light beer. I wouldn't say Coors. I wouldn't put Coors Light in the category of like, this is like a standard American beer or whatever, because it's a light beer, right? That's supposed to be 3% or something retarded.
Yeah, well, the standard beers that you get, and this is actually pretty common across. This is actually from German influence, because a lot of people think of German beer as being this like really strong beer or whatever, and it's not, because it's designed. They make these weaker beers so you can drink a lot of it. And when American beer corporate beer manufacturers started to see this, they're like, hey, if we make weaker beers, people will have to drink more and they'll have to buy more. So a lot of these mainstream beers come in about 4.1%, which is actually the like what Guinness comes in at. This is what a lot of the German imports come in at. So
it's like starting to get to a point where it's kind of respectable. For anything under 4% is like, unacceptable. 4% is like when it's starting to get pretty real,
I don't know. It's a little weak for me.
It is. I mean, I like to drink something that's more like 6% or something like that. But, that's, dude, don't come to Australia. I'm sorry. It's very, very hard to find a strong beer here. But I think that there's some legal reason for that. I don't know what it is exactly, but they got some pretty decent 5% beers here. I mean, Like I say, I'm not a beer connoisseur. I'll probably get like, hoisted on my petard by like fucking Australians who are like, you gotta try this. I've had some great craft brew beers here in Australia. I don't really know. I like to drink a good Swan beer. That's a nice one in Australia. That's a pretty good one. But yeah, for the most part, I don't know. Maybe it's just my fucking Canadian nationalism. I think we got the best beer. I'm sorry to say. But yeah, I could see why, Pennsylvania boys, there's a good beer culture there because you guys are from Northern England. That's where you sort of ancestrally come from. And the Northern English are really Norsemen, effectively.
Germans.
Germans, Germanics, shall we say. These are people who, like, ancestrally are beer drinkers and mead drinkers. There's some good fucking mead here, actually. I've got some mead on my shelf here in Australia. That, maybe it's just the one place that I'm close to, but like that side of it, I'll stand that for sure. Never drank mead in Canada. Don't know what it's like there. But yeah, no, we've got a good drinking culture. It's not as violent in Canada of the drinking culture as it is here in Australia. It's extremely violent here comparatively. Oh fuck yeah, dude! It's crazy. Actually, it's crazy how fucking violent it is here compared to Canada, and I think probably compared to the U.S. If I'm being honest.
So,
like,
let me ask
holding
you.
Constant, yeah.
My dad told me, because my dad is like a big, like he goes around the world. He's a big hunter, right? So he goes around the world for big game. And he did a thing in Australia, and he went hunting out in Australia. And he said that there are parts in Australia that are like so extremely like dangerous. Like the crime is so bad that you can't leave anything in your car, or passerbys will smash your windows out and steal everything. Like it's like out of control crime in Australia that gets covered up. Have you experienced anything like that?
I've not experienced that. I don't know where he's talking about. Like, I'm sure he's not lying, but like, I just don't know where. Maybe he's like, is this a recent trip or whatever? Like, maybe he's gone to like one of these like little Somalia places and these like modern, urban hellholes or something. But that's not the way it is in Australia in general. It's like,
no, he said it was Australians doing. I was like, no, dude, there's no way. Like, how is it that so I was like, maybe it's all that time in the sun, maybe they got something funky in the beer that just makes these Australians crazy. They go wrestle crocodiles and, have sex with kangaroos or whatever they do. And then they smash out your windows and steal your jacket.
Well, Australians have a very strong redneck culture. It's what they call bogans here in Australia. And yeah, these are like your redneck guys. They'll have their ute, which is like their version of a pickup truck, but it's a little different. The sides come down. It's a flatbed truck with like these little flimsy sides on it or whatever. It's actually quite useful. It's a well-designed, vehicle. But they've got their ute. They've been baking in the sun for 20 years. Like, it's gone to their head, I guess. But there's definitely a very strong redneck culture in Australia. And you know what? More power to him, man. Especially like where I live. Like, I live in a reasonable sized city, but like the culture that surrounds the city, like, in the state or whatever, is a very much more rural type culture. And it's actually awesome. I love that. So yeah, there's a big redneck culture here. Maybe 20, 30 years ago or something like that, it was probably strong enough to where you might have to be careful. I don't know. As it is now, where I live, it's fucking safe. You don't have to worry about that. But if you go down to the bar, if you go down to like the strip, where all the bars are and everything like that, you will very easily get into a fucking fight. It's Aussies like to fight, man. They do. It's just that's who they are. And there's the trope of like, it's because it's a penal colony or whatever. I don't know what the fuck it is. It's just part of who they are. And I get it. I do actually. And I respect it. I think that there's nothing wrong with that or whatever. But it is a difference. It is a difference between Canadian and Australian culture. I mean, like I say, Canadians, we're very polite people, but if you push us too far, we become fucking tigers. But you have to, like, that fuse is pretty long. You have to really burn it down.
Yeah.
So, that's very different than the Americans. Like, I noticed when I went to Seattle before the last trip to the US that I went on before coming over to Australia, I just noticed the dudes there are fucking angry. I don't know what it is. I'm just like wandering through the city. And I just got the vibe of like everyone is pissed off. That's what it seems like to a Canadian. Like, I don't know what it is, man. I don't mean it as a critique. It's just like that was my honest impression or whatever.
Do you get that vibe from Americans you talk to online?
Maybe slightly. I don't know. It's like there is a difference, but it's like, I think most of the guys I talk to online, which is in our political sphere, are fucking cool. So I don't know. They don't strike me as like being that much more angry or whatever. But there is a little bit of a difference. Like Americans are more forward and more assertive, to a degree. It's like the difference should not be exaggerated. But I think when you get people together in a group, I don't know like what this is. It's just something that I've noticed as an observation, a social observation in general. It's like if you got like a guy from India that lives in like, white southwestern Ontario, Canada, he's going to act pretty fucking white for the most part. He's just going to, he lives in the culture. He's just sort of assimilated and blah, 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 whatever. But if you get a pocket of like, Indian people living together, they're going to revert to type. They're going to start to become and act and think and behave much more Indian-like, right? And it's the same with any group of people. It's like you get them in isolation, they're individuals. You put them together and they start to become who they are as a culture, right? I think it's probably the same, you could say, in a big city. It's like you interact with an American one-on-one online or whatever, just one-on-one in like an isolated environment. He's just going to be a normal person. He's just going to sort of strike you as, a pretty normal guy or whatever. But you get like Americans into a big city or whatever, and they're going to start to act much more American. It's just how it works. When you get people into these aggregate groups, they tend to revert to their like social type, to their cultural type. It's just how it works. And so when I visited Seattle, it's a big enough city. It just seemed like there was a difference. I went there and I just walked down the street and I just felt it. I felt a tension that was not what I was used to, kind of thing. And it's just what it is. It's just a difference in culture, I think.
Yeah. I got another one of my Canadian buddies. He, I work with him on some projects and stuff. He said that, now he was like, he's like, nothing against you guys or anything like that. But he's like, when he has to come and do like a voice call and there's like a bunch of, us Americans, he says it's almost like exhausting. It's like a workout to like socially interact with us for a long period is how he described it. He's like, it's just because, I guess we talk faster. I don't know. It's just that's just how he described it. That it's a little bit exhausting. That afterwards he's got to go recharge. Now it could just be him because he's he might be an introverted guy and that's how introverts are. But he framed it as like this is kind of like my me being a Canadian having to interact with Americans.
What was the context of it again? What was like was it within a work environment or something? Or
yeah, it was talking about projects and stuff.
Okay. One thing I've noticed, because, when I was pretty young, I used to like work a call center job, a couple call center jobs and stuff like that. One thing I noticed is that Americans demand customer service. Americans are like have a very high expectation of the level of customer service that you're going to get and the politeness that they expect out of like a commercial interaction. When I call, I don't know if this could be generalized across Americans because of, when I call like an American company and I have to interact with their like customer service department, it's always fucking Mexicans and shit like that. So maybe this is not a American thing, it's the Mexican thing, but I've noticed that they are very formal. Americans are very formal and very polite in the way that they interact in a professional environment. That is something that I've very much noticed. And they expect you to do the same. They expect the reciprocation of that out of the customer and whatnot. But also, like, you know, Americans who called in to, like, you know, whether it was me doing outbound sales calls or like fielding customer service calls inbound, it's like Americans definitely had that expectation of like of high customer service. And it's just something I noticed. I don't know. It's just a bit of a difference there. Whereas I think Americans in their non-professional, like their, you know, social interaction, what's the word I'm looking for? Whatever, outside of work or whatever, very casual, very sort of like, you know, not as formal kind of thing or whatever. But in their work environment, very professional, very much like expecting a kind of like standard of service and a standard of etiquette that's, you know, here in Australia, it's very different, actually. Australians are very casual in general. Like, your boss will call you like mate, yeah, you know, which to me is like, it's weird because I'm not used to it, but it's also, it sounds to me like your boss is calling you bud, right? Or like, you know, I it would not be out of line for me to say that to my boss or something like that here in Australia. How you going, mate? Like, that's, you know, that is not considered, like, that is a perfectly fine interaction in like the business environment or whatever, right? Whereas in America, I think like calling somebody bud, you know, when you're closing a business deal would be weird, right?
Inappropriate. Yeah, that's and I'll tell you, it's been pointed out to me by people from other countries. Americans do 100% have that. If you work in customer service, you have two personalities. You have to turn on the customer service personality, like, you know, things like, and it's like a discipline. It's like if you would answer a phone, like if you know, greetings, thank you for calling the Biz Archives. I am Dave. How may I help you? If you say something like, if you're working in customer service and you say, how can I help you? Your boss will correct you. No, you say, how may I help you?
Yeah.
It's like little stuff like that. And if you don't have that and you're kind of aloof or just like a little too personal, people will like take offense to it, right? You have to have, you know, how are we doing today? I'm so and so. Welcome to blah blah blah. Today, blah 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 blah. How can blah, blah, blah. You got to have that, or Americans don't fucking like it, right?
Yeah,
it's just the way it is.
It's just part of the culture, man. It's just like part of the business culture there, and it's just different, right? I don't know what to make of it. I don't know, like, if we can draw any grand conclusions from that, but it's just a difference that I've noticed between Canadians and Americans, and certainly between Australians and Americans. So yeah, no, there's lots to talk about. We didn't get to talk about the quiet revolution. This is something I thought was interesting. I don't know if I really want to end on this note because it's actually pretty sad. Basically, it's how the Quebecois sort of over like one fucking decade basically like lost a huge amount of their culture due to basically like political bullshit. It's probably not a.
I got time if you want to talk about it.
Yeah, we could talk about it. Okay, so I mean, the Quebecois are obviously different in like they're French Canadians. They speak a different language, but they also have a different religion. They're Catholic, whereas the rest of Canada, English-speaking Canada, is mostly Protestant. So there is that difference as well. They're a distinct society. I mentioned at the beginning, in the 1980s, there was this thing called the Meech Lake Accord that basically was it kind of fell apart, but it was meant to acknowledge Quebec as a distinct society, and Quebec is a distinct society. It really is kind of its own country. I'll come back to Quebec nationalism after we talk about this because it kind of be good. It kind of leads into it. But the Quebecois are basically French Catholics. They have their own culture, and up until the 1970s, they were very traditionalist, very, very much concerned with their education system was bound up with the Catholic Church, very high birth rates and things like that. Very traditionalist culture. It's a lot of respect for the Quebecois for that reason. And this thing called the Quiet Revolution is a case study of how fast shit can fucking fall apart. So Quebec went from a traditionalist Catholic culture with like 4 births per woman to like a modern secularized culture within about a decade. It was absolute, like, this is something that needs to be understood by guys. If you can figure out what happened in this quiet revolution, you can figure out what is happening more broadly in the West, because this is the biggest, quickest sea change, this whiplash change of cultural degeneration that I've ever seen. It happened from about 1960 to 1970. The culture itself didn't change overnight, but the political situation did. And of course, the culture followed inevitably from this. And there's, I'm not, obviously I'm not from Quebec. There's probably a lot of people in the French Canadian community who could explain this with much greater depth than I can. But basically, what happened in this time frame is that due to the election of a liberal government in Quebec, or sort of concomitant to that, like at the same time as that, whether that's the cause or whether that's the effect, not clear. But the provincial government basically took over education from the church and from families in Quebec. And there were other changes as well. It would be kind of like, not really worth going through all of them. But basically what happened was you went from this traditionalist Catholic enclave within Canada to like a secular, it's still Catholic, but like it had been completely hollowed out, like the way that the modern Catholic Church is sort of in general now, very, very quickly. And what's interesting about it is because of this, because the Quebecois lost their culture, or their culture was like basically paused so badly over such a short period of time, it single-handedly revived Quebecois nationalism and the push for Quebec to leave Canada. Like I say, it happened, this quiet revolution happened from about 1960 to 1970. By the 1980s, Quebecois nationalism and Quebec separatism was a real political force in Canadian culture. So it's a very sad thing. I like it. You can see why I didn't want to end on this note, because it's terrible, actually. It became Quebec became very liberal, very secular, very moving towards a kind of gay, like globalist ideology, what the rest of the West has moved toward ever since then. So yeah, this is something that happened in that time, and it really revived Quebecois nationalism. Now, when I was a kid, I mean, born in 1980, so when the Meech Lake Accords collapsed in 1987, a few years later, this pissed off the Quebecois, so they started to push for separatism and a vote to leave the country. And I think there was a vote. There was definitely a vote in 1995. I think there was one in 1992 as well. I'm not sure. But anyway, the 95 one just barely missed having Quebec vote to separate. It was like 50.4% voted not to separate. And so, we just kind of, just missed that one. And I remember at the time thinking to myself, what a bunch of selfish assholes. What's a bunch of fucking ungrateful shits that don't want to be part of this great country that I love and everything, blah, 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 blah. And this is basically in English speaking Canada. This is really how it was portrayed. I didn't really come to this conclusion, on the basis of my like 14 or 15-year-old like reasoning capacities. It was just spoon fed to me by the media. And I took it on. I was like, these fucking Quebec assholes. And I really hated the Quebecois for a long time, because I was just like, fuck them. They don't want to be part of our country. Maybe they should fuck off. But they're assholes, basically. But it wasn't until much later, not until, the last 5-10 years, that I really got it. I really understand why the Quebecois want to be their own country, and it would be shitty for Canada if they were to have left. But frankly, I you know, I get it, and I kind of think that they should have left for their own good. They should have left, but they didn't, and we are where we are now. So, the things that change over the course of your life when you kind of take on nationalism.
Wow, we don't we just assume that there are French Canadians. Like we don't even really learn that there's kind of this I guess enclave isn't even a good word, but this interior nation within the nation of Canada.
It is a distinct society within Canada.
And, when I went to Canada, we drove through Quebec and we stopped at a gas station and got something to eat and everything like that. And there's this stereotype that we hear that the Quebecois are dicks and they don't speak English or whatever, blah, blah. All of them I met spoke English and were very nice to us, even though we're Americans, right? So I didn't experience any of that. I thought they were pretty cool people, right? And
they're awesome, man. I get it. At the time, ignorant as I was from my English Canadian perspective, I was like, fuck those people. But now I get it and I understand where they're coming from. And I love the Quebec. I love the French Canadian culture. It's a different culture. And it's cool. It's cool that they have it. And it's cool that they've maintained it. And I respect that. And anybody who comes to Canada, Quebec should be probably one of the first places that you visit because it's really great. Now, if you're an American who doesn't give a shit about you're never going to travel to Europe, but you kind of want to get a little bit of European flavor. You want to just you see what it is to be in a European city without actually flying across the ocean. If you live in the northeast seaboard in the U.S., go to Quebec City. It's a beautiful city. It's got a very, very European flavor to it. It's got these narrow roads with the cobblestone streets, the old style, European architecture, the Chateau Frontenac, which is this big hotel that's got European style architecture with I forget what it's called, but yeah, it's got so many. It's just got this European flavor to it. It's awesome. Rural Quebec culture is really cool. Montreal is great, but it's also a big city, so it's still got a very strong French culture, obviously. But you kind of have to go a little further afield to get the real French style. And I respect it, man. I love these people. I think that it would be sad to see them go. They won't go because global isn't going to let that happen. But it's it would have been sad to see them go because they're an important part of Canada. French Canada is that's part of our culture. That's part of our makeup. Like I said, our ethnogenesis, I think it was a little bit more complete, even if they did maintain their own culture. We certainly absorbed a lot from them, and they absorbed a lot from us too. But it's sad. It's sad to see this quiet revolution thing have happened to them because, this was a neck-snapping whiplash move from a very trad culture into the deracinated gay fucking modernity that happened so quick. But it's interesting. It's an interesting case of what you could maybe call accelerationism, where these people now, Quebec is definitely one of the most trenchant nationalist places in Canada. And I think that if it had happened over a longer period of time, if this frog had been allowed to boil very slowly in the water, you would not have seen that. But as it is now, I mean, Quebec, basically, they're political parties are very different in Canada than the US. You guys have a two-party system for the basically. We have a multi-party system that's, I mean, it's not our political parties are wildly different from each other, really. But there is one that is wildly different from all the rest, and that's the Bloc Québécois, which is the Quebec Party. Basically, Quebec has their own party that's just for Quebec interests, and that's it. They're not about anything else. They're just about getting as much as they can get for themselves, which is a very honest politics. It's based, yeah. It's a very honest politics. It's if I was in Quebec, that's the one I would be voting for sure. And they're also very culturally conservative. They're very nationalist. They're very, for the most part, they're pretty right wing. There was a time in the 90s where it's hard to say, but anyway, and it's fucking based. Like the Bloc Québécois is totally fucking based in that way. I think I'll probably get shit on by some Canadians for that, but yeah, I'll stand behind it. And it's like I say, it's an interesting case of like, because these people were like just ripped out of their traditional culture so fast, now they have basically become like entrenched in nationalism. So, here is a possible case study of like how accelerationism could work. Because for the most part, like people who are accelerationists or people who oppose accelerationism, like we basically don't have any we don't really have any case studies of like how it would work, because it's all very hypothetical at the moment. But I would put this forward as something.
Yeah. So I got up for a minute there and went to monkey with my air conditioner. So what was the cause of this silent revolution? Who put this in?
That is a good question. I can't really give you a solid answer. Basically, there was a very, in the 1950s in Quebec, there was a very conservative government in their provincial government, but that changed, I believe, in 1960 or 62 or ish, something like that. And a liberal government was voted in, and basically started making all these changes to the structure of how the changes to how like the education system worked. For the most part, the education system was like, education was basically it was run by the Catholic Church for the most part. Like in the in Quebec, that was changed and it was federalized, or well, not federalized, but it was like brought to the provincial level more than like to the level of like the Catholic Church was subordinated essentially to these like provincial and federal politics. And before that, there was a lot of families, like there was a lot of homeschooling, and families were very much more involved in like the schooling of their children. So that was all changed. There was all kinds of changes that were made, but it was basically all top down. Like this is all elite driven. Certainly, it wasn't the people of Quebec who just decided to become this was imposed on them. There's probably a better explanation. There's probably a deeper explanation of who imposed it, how, what the mechanism was. I can't really give that explanation. I tried to get some people to fill me in before this episode on that, but it's something that really deserves to be investigated. I think that if you can understand how the Quiet Revolution happened in Quebec, you could probably understand with more depth how it's happening. The same revolution is happening everywhere at an even more accelerated rate today.
That's so. Would you say that this was due to like Anglo-Canadian influence, or was this something that was completely from within?
I don't.
You don't know.
I don't. It's hard to say. I think probably what I say this with no evidence, but like just a hunch. I think probably there was a lot of like what we would call the high-low versus middle mechanism going on, basically, where you've got elites. I think there probably was a fair bit of English Canadian influence. There probably was a fair bit of international influence. There probably was a fair bit of we can't talk about it influence. There was I think there was all these influences that were basically like, we have to get rid of this bastion of fucking traditionalism, like that. Yeah. This giant province in the middle of fucking North America that like is still extremely traditionalist has to fucking go, right? I think probably that this was something that was done by the high-low versus middle mechanism. There's probably the alliance between basically elites and the underclass, like the scum, and to just hollow out normal people. I think that this is basically how like politics works. Like this is how it's worked from the time of like Rome forward. This is, for the most part, this is how revolutions happen. So I can only expect that this is how it happened in Quebec. but I don't have any like particulars that I can point to. It is something that needs investigation.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was due to I'm not sure who was in charge of Canada at that, but there in the 90s, like the 80s into the 90s, the Canadian government was actually a pretty subversive international force. Like they were kind of the guys that were behind the thrust to organize the world against South African apartheid. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that was kind of, the like I mentioned at the beginning, once Canada had basically become its own country, and was sort of severed from like, official or like formal British influence, unfortunately at that point in time, you think that this would be sort of like the golden age of like Canadian identity. But I think that this is sort of a time when a lot of social constructionism comes in, and a lot of like even our conservative government at the time, which is what sort of bizarrely, it sounds like an oxymoron now, called the Progressive Conservative Government, which is basically the center-right party, had basically it's as useless as any center-right party ever is, right? Like, and this was sort of like what was in power in the like late 80s into the 90s, eventually got changed to the Liberal government of Jean Chrétien, but the Brian Mulroney government of the Progressive Conservatives kind of did everything wrong, right? Like, it failed to shore up like, social conservatism, while also bringing in, the unfortunate influence of like, right-wing, supposedly right-wing economics, right? Like libertarianism, basically. So it's like the worst of both sides. And This was not a good influence. It was as bad of an influence as the fucking John McCain's and Mitt Romney's and all these like retards of today are. It was the same thing back then. So that this was, this should have been like the height of the Canadian identity, should have been a triumph for us. But unfortunately, politically, we kind of dropped the ball at this time.
Yeah. A lot of people don't realize that Canadian politics is pretty fucking corrupt. You know what I mean? Like, Trudeau, Trudeau, I gotta say, like, Trudeau is such a you know what I mean? I'm not dunking on Canadians at all.
He's Trudeau, a national embarrassment to us. Everybody is embarrassed by him.
The American president is a child molester, and still somehow he's not as bad as Justin Trudeau.
Yeah.
Like, that's like, but Trudeau, the reason that he's in power is because his dad and his family are connected to Canadian power or Canadian energy, right? So it's like, these guys are just like
Pierre Trudeau was Prime Minister of Canada for a long time. His father was the Prime Minister for a long time. He is a real archetype of like Canadian liberalism, like liberalism as in the center left. He is not a good character. His son is even worse. It's a horrific political dynasty, and it's really like I left Canada like a little bit before Trudeau got in, and I was glad to fucking go when I saw that happen. I was like, I made the right decision or whatever. Now I miss it. Now I'm like, it's just, it's hard on me. But anyway, at the time I was like, fuck that, like with these like people voting these fucking in. But yeah. So anyway, sorry. Pierre Trudeau was actually Prime Minister of Canada for a long time. He's basically like kind of the fucking FDR of Canada in some ways. He's like this like shitty liberal, center left liberal that was like in for like a huge number of like a lot of terms in a row. Basically, he was in for a long time, and fucked the country badly, unfortunately.
Yeah. What was so maybe I'm incorrect in what I'm saying, but I thought that the Trudeaus were tied to Canadian oil companies.
I don't actually know. I don't really know the that side of it. I don't know a whole lot about like Pierre Trudeau's business connections or anything like that. It's quite possible, but I mean, Justin Trudeau is just like you say, such a fucking like he's just huge he doesn't fucking belong there. He's not smart. He's not charismatic. He's just like, he's got nice hair and he's got the right dad, and his like the extent of his professional credentials are that he was like, you know, a part-time snowboard instructor and like, you know, substitute teacher. Those were his fucking like, you know, credentials professionally before he became the Prime Minister of Canada. And it's like it's horrific. It's just horrific that this guy has been Prime Minister for like at all, but to say like 2 terms is like, it's just an absolute disgrace. It's a national disgrace. Everybody knows it too. I mean, you don't have to belabor it, and I'm not saying anything people don't know. Even liberals, even people who are on the left, like they like him because he's very camera friendly and he says the right things that reinforces their like shitty ideology. But even they are kind of like, really, guy, like, you know, you're gonna like dress up in like Bollywood garb when you go to India. Like, he's so fucking try hard and such a fucking gay rod. It's just like, oh,
he's so terrible. But what I was getting at though is like, I think a lot of like the Canadian, because these guys are just like, you know, there's the conspiracy that Justin Trudeau is like,
Fidel Castro's son.
Yeah. Which I don't think that's true. But you know what? When they put the pictures side by side, it's like,
yeah, it's pretty uncanny, isn't it?
It's pretty pretty convincing. But what I'm kind of, you know, I'm just throwing this out there. I have no idea. But I think a lot of these Canadian elites are just like global vampires that are connected to all of the other global vampires, right? You got Frank Justra from Uranium One. He's a Canadian. He has all the he's like the reigning uranium guy, you know what I mean? And then Frank Justra is part of the Clinton Foundation, best buds with the Clintons, and the Trudeaus are mixed up in there. They own all the oil in Canada, or they're part of it, or whatever. And then there's this thing in South Africa that kind of happened that they spearheaded, and then immediately after the South African Revolution, they took the global vampires took control of the South African diamond mines and the oil reserves. That's like literally what they painted as, the rainbow revolution and all. We're gonna, Canada was like, they're like, we're gonna liberate the fucking people of South Africa and apartheid. Really, what they were after was the diamonds and the oil, right? Yeah. So it's like, maybe a lot of this, I think people are sleeping on the subversive influence of the Canadian elites.
Well, the thing is, like, there is really no difference between the Canadian and American elites. They're like economically tied at the hip. Canada and America are so integrated economically that they are basically like, there isn't a border at all between Canada and America in terms of economics anyway. There certainly is a cultural difference. There's even some political difference, but in terms of economics, I mean, I forget, it's been ages since I've looked at the statistics, but last I looked, it was like, an enormous amount of the Canadian economy is fully dependent on exports to the United States. We have no sovereignty as far as like, if we decided that we wanted to stop exporting energy to the US, like we would just become the fucking 51st state. That would be it, right? Like, and everybody knows it. It's like, the same thing that's happening with Germany right now with their fucking like Nord Stream pipeline getting torpedoed. Like, everybody knows that Europe is basically like another state of the United States, right? Like it's pretty fucking clear that this is just how it is. Like, there's basically 3 sovereign, maybe 4 sovereign countries in the world, and Canada is not one of them, I'm sorry to say. Neither is England or Germany or any of these other places. So, I mean, that's just the case. But Canada is so tied to the U.S. in terms of its economics that, of course, our elites are, certainly our commercial and manufacturing elites are going to be basically on a continuum with those of America. But even our political elites are like that. So, Canadians are kind of like, we're not as corrupt as the Americans. We're certainly not as corrupt as the Russians. Like, this is sort of like boomer tier take on like, based on just utter fantasy. But yeah, it's like, we are, as Canadians, we are just as corrupt as the Americans. We're just as corrupt as the sort of like London elite in, London City or whatever. and we have to face up to that. It's just a fact. So yeah, you're right about that.
Yeah. Well, we've been going on for over 2 hours. Who'd have thunk that the Canadian episode would be our biggest episode? Very cool.
I guess that's what happens when one half of your culture dads is a Canadian.
A proud based.
Oh yeah, a very, very much proud Canadian, and it's very, this is one of the things, I think I've said this before, but one of the things that really was a huge kind of like it was a bit of a red pill for me, was just like seeing everybody else in Canada that like thought nationalism was retarded, that like didn't understand like what it was to be proud of, what we had to be proud of, like did not understand that. Basically, a lot of Canadians where I grew up, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but where I grew up, the time and place that I came up in, the extent of Canadian pride was that you weren't American. And that's a pretty fucking sad cultural national identity. And it didn't sit well with me. And I always thought that we had a lot to be proud of. I always loved where I came from. I loved the place. I loved the land. I love the nature aspect of it. I love where we are, where we're situated, where we come from. I love the history. I love the culture. I love the food. I love the art. I love everything about it. And I think that Canadians have an immense amount to be proud of, especially for a fairly small country in terms of population. We, like I say, we are punching above our weight. I think we do. We have a very positive influence in the world, especially culturally. So lots to be proud of. And the fact that no one else that I knew was proud of it at all was kind of like, well, what the fuck? That's like a glitch in the matrix. And in some ways, this is kind of like maybe the first glitch that like sent me looking for another alternative, eventually led me to where I am today. So yeah, Canada has a very interesting culture worth checking out. I hope guys who listen to this have got a list going or whatever. I'll put some stuff in the show notes. I would very much recommend checking out Canadian culture because I'm very proud of it. And I think I have good reason to be.
Very, very cool. So, all right. Well, let's wrap it up here, guys. In celebration of this episode, make sure to go check out the Tragically Hip. Go check out Kids in the Hall and go listen to some Rush, man. Listen, 2112. Let me tell you, that's like one of the greatest.
We didn't even talk about Rush. What the fuck?
I know.
How did I miss that?
Episode canceled. We got to do another one. Another take.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so go check out some Rush and fire up some poutine and drink some good old Moosehead and celebrate Canadian culture because Canadians are based and Canadian culture has its own identity that is not the same as America. It's its own thing. But we're gonna wrap it up for this evening, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're listening right now, which means you're already signed up, but if you're not, make sure to go over to imperiumpress.org/podcast and go check out the great stuff that's available there. We got Culture Dads, obviously. If you sign up to the Gumroad, you get the Culture Dads, but you also get Imperium Cast. And most importantly, you get exclusive hardback copies of Imperium Press's great, great books. Man, Folk Tales and Indo-European Tradition, Beowulf, so much great stuff over there. I don't know if it's a hardback or whatever, but Imperium Press just dropped. I have it right here. Maestra's on the Spanish Inquisition. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but a lot of people really like.
This is a very interesting book, man. I think guys really need to read this. Of course, it's about the Spanish Inquisition. It's about how basically traditionalism was maintained in Spain much longer as a result of this, how it insulated Spain from the French Revolution and everything because of it. And it's a contrarian take by today's standards. I mean, it was written in the 1800s, but it's just basically like if you throw this at like any normie, they'd be like, "What the fuck? Like you're going to defend the Spanish Inquisition? What's next, right? You're going to defend the Holocaust or whatever?" Some gay take like that, but he really makes the case well. But it's more than that. It's very interesting because one of the things that I've been talking about on my Substack is what I call the hard problem of conscience, which is when personal experience, personal belief enters into the situation when like when you become the arbiter of what is the highest good, when you're the judge of God, when you're the judge of the highest truth, this is a bit of a problem. And it's a problem that I've been elaborating on my Substack. It basically puts you into the epistemic driver's seat, and that is, it opens the way for liberalism. There is just no way to avoid liberalism once you've done that. And what's interesting here is that Maistre has reached the same conclusion towards the end of this book. So for that alone, I think it's worth reading. It's very interesting. I see it as a sort of it's a defense of, I put into the blurb on the back, as a defense of Catholicism over Protestantism. It's basically a defense of traditionalism over liberalism. So very interesting book. I think more guys need to read it, and I hope to see, it's been selling fairly well. I hope to see a lot more people reading it in the future.
Yeah, it's cool book. I haven't got a chance to finish it yet, but it's on my current stack. I'm, getting into publishing. It's like I've always had a stack of to read that I got to get through. Now that I'm in publishing, it's like, forget about it. It's like my stack. I got like multiple stacks now.
I have never read less, like for my own enjoyment, than I have since starting a publishing company. I love what it is that I like have to read, because that's why I started this thing. But I rarely ever get to like read stuff like for my own pleasure now.
Oh yeah.
So,
oh man.
I'm sure you understand it.
We should do a whole episode talking about the experience of indie publishing.
Yeah. Well, maybe if guys want to hear that, let us know. Give us some feedback, and we'll do it.
Very cool. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in for Culture Dads. Hails and blessings to each and every one of you guys. I'll see you guys next time.
Later, boys.